Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real Texans having real conversations about what's going on in our state. Today, I am joined by two of my colleagues, Kate Bierly and Cameron Abrams, to discuss a growing threat in Texas, those that seek to Islamify our country and state. Islamists that have taken over land and schools all across Texas to spread their version, their vision for a Texas Caliphate. Team, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into this really pressing issue that, quite frankly, we've been looking into for several years when we saw that entities from the Hamas-linked Qatari Foundation is funding public schools and putting Arabic programs into our public schools all across the country. But let's start with just recently, our great Governor Abbott, had a proclamation naming or designating CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, as a foreign terrorist organization, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood. So I want to jump into that and ask, Cameron, can you give us a little background on the lead up to that designation?
Yeah, well, with that proclamation, both those organizations are unable to purchase property in the state. And that's because there's been lots of reporting, lots of evidence coming out that both of those groups have links to radical ideologies like Hamas. And this isn't, like you were saying, this isn't something that's just happened recently.
Right.
This has been going on for decades. Like, as we were digging into this story, trying to figure out all the pieces, I went all the way back to the 90s, where Qatar had hosted Al-Qaeda charities. And they were hosting these charities, allowing money to flow through these charities in Qatar to Al-Qaeda linked groups. And again, the links between Qatar and these radical groups extend all the way to Hamas in Palestine. Like I mentioned, they endorsed the group after their election and actually sent them hundreds of millions of dollars. And so this has been something for a few decades everyone's been keeping an eye on. Another thing that is important to understand is the administration is aware of this. During the first Trump administration, he sent off a flurry of different tweets. In one of them, he named Qatar in saying they were facilitating what he called radical ideology. So we're seeing it for decades now. The administration is aware of it. And there was even in 2018 a House National Security Subcommittee hearing detailed Qatar as a central actor in facilitating the Muslim Brotherhood and other affiliated movements in their terrorist activities, both through financial support and providing safe harbor in the country. So there's lots of evidence just mounting here about how Qatar is aiding in these terrorist activities.
This is terrifying because I know you went back several decades. We can go back into the 90s when the report was listed and the Holy Land Foundation, right? It was found to be funding, and they do it under the guise of C3s. They figured out how to weaponize our charitable organizations and send money to terrorist organizations that have completely different values and that do seek to spread the Caliphate, which would obviously be Islamic rule. What we're watching right now in Iran, where the Persians that were taken over in '79 by the Revolutionary Guard, they are fighting back. But that's what these people, the Islamists, are trying to do, correct? They are trying to instill their it's a political ideology, right? Is that what's going on?
It is a political ideology, and there are a few different ways they do it. Obviously, we see the terrorist attacks with the violence, but there's also the cultural, educational influence that they infuse within academia, specifically, that we're seeing here. Like, for example, there's a organization, a nonprofit called the Qatar Foundation, and this was established all the way back in 1995, and they are directly connected with the Qatar government. And even though they label themselves as a education, science, and cultural development organization, because of their direct ties with the Qatari government, with all the evidence that we've already laid out at the top here, it brings about there's a big gray area between this public and private partnership between this nonprofit and the government itself, and how the government is using this foundation to infuse the terroristic radical ideologies at the back end once that money begins to flow. And so that's just one example. There's many more here. Yeah. There is the Qatar Foundation International, which is the American arm of this Qatar Foundation. Okay. And through this KFI, which is the acronym, they are providing what they call classroom enrichment grants to both ISDs, so K through 12, and they're also providing money to universities. And they do this to try and promote Arabic in these classrooms through providing these funds so they can purchase resources and materials to, what they say, supplement their teaching of the Arabic language and Arab world. And so, again, the money is flowing in connection from the foundation and the government all the way down to here in Texas.
This is a soft power play, right?
Right.
So they're funding the terrorists, and that would be considered hard power, actual weaponizing individuals to engage in terroristic activity, whether it's terrorist attacks, whether it's threats, whatever it is. And so, but the soft power play, and we can actually look to China, who did this as well with the Confucius Institutes.
Exactly right.
That we found that the propaganda is being pushed into our public universities, our public schools. They are sending teachers in to teach really radical ideology. And I think that's important to note. China, who does not share our values, they are an adversary. They are our enemies. They are trying to subvert Western civilization, and they are using it through soft power. And they did that with Confucius. They're doing it now with all these Mandarin and Chinese programs that they're putting in our schools. But what you're saying is that the Islamists are doing the same thing, and they are utilizing a country, Qatar, that has also a lot of business interests. They've inserted themselves into our business interests here in Texas, but they are trying to subvert our education system. They are trying to radicalize our kids.
Well, in an example of this soft power that you just explained, I came across an article from 2018.
Okay.
And in this article, it highlighted the fact that the Qatar Foundation would not allow their teachers to purchase maps that showed the state of Israel. And so it's a subtle thing like that, just a map on a classroom.
But their content doesn't either, right? If they don't put it on their maps, we know that their content does not acknowledge the existence of Israel either.
Correct. And so it's these subtle changes that slowly indoctrinates young children into a particular worldview. And so that is the soft power aspect that you just described.
So that's really important. Kate, I want to talk to you about something that you wrote about that is directly related to this. When we talk about the infiltration of our public education system and the soft power of slowly changing the culture, I say all the time, we are in a cultural revolution. We are watching as students that long march to the institution that started in the 60s. We are really seeing that rotten fruit that's been born, where kids do not understand the values, the standards of morality, the where our history in the Western civilization and America being its greatest embodiment came from. But you found some research showing what Cameron's talking about, where we have public schools. There is a public school in Texas that there's evidence, but we have great suspicions in these Arabic programs. There's a public school in Texas, in Irving, Texas. There's evidence they had the big maps plastered on the wall that the Qatari Foundation provided them. Talk to us a little bit about that school and the Arabic programs that, as far as I know, no one's actually scanning what's coming in from the Qatar Foundation, who by the way, is also the main artery of Hamas, if I remember you telling me.
That is correct.
All right, let's hear about it.
No, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head, because this is not a kinetic warfare that we're fighting. They are completely infiltrating through soft power. And so a great example of this is Manera Academy out of Irving, Texas. They are a public charter school. And Qatari Foundation International, they supported classroom materials, and they supported, or one of the materials was a map of the Arab world. And this map completely erased Israel. And so this is just one instance of many that are popping up of where we're slowly starting to see this soft power. Yeah. And so again, this isn't just one school, this is statewide.
Let's talk about that with statewide. I want to, before we get into the Arabic programs that no one's vetting, just to really hammer this point home, there was a young lady named Lynette Atkins. She's a Texan. And several years ago, she went worldwide viral on the platform TikTok for reading out a manifesto, a letter from the evil terrorist Osama bin Laden that attacked our nation because he doesn't like our values and wanted to spread the Islamic Caliphate, let's be clear, saying she understood. This young lady went to school in a public high school in San Antonio area. And I think it's very important that people connect these dots. This is real. This is happening. These students are being radicalized in our K through 12 system. And that's what we're seeing. So I want you to talk about kind of how this is happening throughout our state. That's just one example. Lynette Atkins, who went viral for agreeing with Osama bin Laden, but also these Arabic programs.
Yes, this is a huge deal. We're seeing some of our biggest ISDs taking so much money from the Qatari Foundation International. For example, Austin ISD, they received a $100,000 grant for an Arabic language and culture program. We also have Houston ISD. Some reports say they accepted $75,000. Other reports say it's up to $85,000 to do the exact same thing. And this money helped pay for teachers. It helped pay for curriculum and also for classroom materials. But on top of that, we're seeing more ISDs be touched by this Arabic program growing. And so, for example, University of Texas at Austin, they started a flagship Arabic program, and they're working in tandem with Pflugerville ISD. Also, I think it's important to mention as well, this is not recent. This started back in 2015 and 2016, so these have already been working for almost a decade now.
Well, it explains why we're seeing kids on college campuses protest for Hamas. They are protesting for terroristic entities. They are, following the talking points of the terror groups. And these are the kids that our tax dollars are paying for. More than anything, they're the next generation of Texans. They're the next generation of Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to note as well, there is no reporting requirement for K through 12. So this is just what we're finding above the surface. We really don't know the extent to where this money is going. But something that we do know, which we have talked about in prior episodes, is Texas A&M. They're just one of many universities in Texas receiving money from Qatar. And in 2017, they reported that they had received $131 million from Qatar. Now, that may sound so alarming, but after the Trump's first term, the U.S. Department of Education did an investigation, and they found over $600 million coming from Qatar. So there's a lot of money going on there. But that's not the most alarming part about this.
Okay.
Which is also another thing we've talked about before, but it's important to mention again. There was $100 million that went undisclosed going directly to their TEAS station, Texas Engineering Experiment Station. And so this focuses on our nation's very sensitive research focusing on nuclear proliferation and cybersecurity. And so Qatar has access to all of that intellectual property, and that raises huge alarm bells for Texas.
Yeah, so it's both the cultural soft power, but also it's a national security issue.
It's 100% a national security issue. We are watching active subversion of our culture and our future. And as the leaders of the free world, we are watching. I remember seeing an interview with, his name was Yuri Bezmenov, and he was a former leader for the USSR. And he was talking about their plan to take over America, to take over Western civilization. And it's fascinating. It was from the 80s. And he talked about, first step is called demoralization. But he was their propaganda chief. That's what Bezmenov was. He was their propaganda chief, and he said their whole thing was demoralization, was to demoralize the society, the people, to tell them they're bad. And they said they actually saw it back in the 80s that this was already happening because the feminist movement was on the rise. They were telling women that having families, having babies was somehow subjugating them to a life of servitude, and they couldn't reach their full potential. Of course, you had go have sex with everybody, that movement. Then you had the kind of intersectionality that came out of, this was much later with Kimberly Crenshaw, but really that long march to the institution. They saw it happening in our public schools. And so they said demoralization is already occurring. And that's what we're seeing, where Americans don't hold that pride. And then it goes into destabilization, where you start destabilizing. You create these factions. And that's where you're seeing a lot of this happening.
Yeah, well, and what you mentioned earlier about those Palestine protests that are happening, it's this new fusion in the Red-Green Alliance, the secular, radical Marxist ideology, where originally the green part was the environmentalist groups, but now we're seeing the green wrapped in with the Islamist extremists. Okay. And so it's how both of these groups see themselves as part of the oppressed class here in America. And so they find common ground there, and they team up in, as we've seen throughout the nation, especially here in Texas. We saw it at UT Austin with those large protests at the Capitol, where we're seeing LGBT flags next to Hamas flags. And you think, what is going on here? But it's this weird alliance that is going on. And it begins with how these ideas are being infused in our education system.
That's right. And I would say all of it, the Red-Green Alliance that you're talking about, the green, because we all have seen all of the Islamist and Arabic nations have green in their flags, and that's kind of the color of a lot of what their logos and all of that is. I know the Muslim Brotherhood has their big green circle with the swords on it. I mean, that's the color they use. And then the red for the Marxists, the Marxist ideology, communist socialist. I know that that's what they want to call themselves, but I say that socialism is, or communism is just Marxism before the government confiscates your guns and starts putting you in the gulags. So, but that Red-Green Alliance is from the Marxists and the Islamists who, while you touched on it, Cameron, they may not have what they think are the same values, if you will. You get the Marxist.
One is a religious theology, one is communist, secularist, but yet they find common ground. Because they both view themselves as an oppressed class.
And they want to
overthrow the U.S. government.
There it is.
Destroy Western Civ.
They want to destroy Western civilization and the values, the freedoms that we all enjoy today. That's what it is. And that's where you're seeing that. And I think it's very important that we talk to our guests and go back to what we're seeing in the public schools, because we all know that there is a crisis. Radical secular Marxists, I talked about the long march through the institutions, where they realized that, quite frankly, the Marxist ideology that was perpetuated and dressed up in the Frankfurt School by Herbert Marcuse, and that was kind of under the rise of Hitler, communism, socialism, let's spread that. He became a professor at Columbia, then at UC San Diego, and partnered to push the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is Paulo Freire, a Marxist from Brazil. That is the number one quoted book in our colleges of education across America. This is all connected, and this is all the entities that seek to demoralize and destabilize. And we're now seeing what the propaganda chief for the USSR was talking about, where he says, and then you go into the crisis. Of course, we've seen the crisis. We saw the crisis of the Islamic terrorists fly their planes into our buildings 25 years ago. We saw and all lived through the crisis of the coming out of China, the COVID virus, where they tried to shut down the world. We're seeing this. And then, of course, the next step after demoralization, destabilization crisis is acceptance. The acceptance of individuals that this is just how it is. This is just what's happening. And we can see that play out. I point to Iran. That's what happened. They didn't just come and, drop black sheets on all the women and say, now you're going to cover up because men can't control themselves. It was a process where that they demoralized, destabilized, created crisis, and then that became the new normal. We cannot let this happen here.
Yeah.
We have got to shine a light. So, what are some current laws that are regulating this in Texas and America that are constitutional, that are on the books, that maybe we can see brought to light a little bit more? And then what are some policy fixes that we need to make sure we're communicating to our great leaders in Texas to continue to perpetuate Western civilization, our standards of morality, the freedoms that we enjoy? I quote Judge Posner, who wrote the famous line, I think it should be famous, that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. We do not have to give in to these radicals that seek to destroy freedom and our way of life. So what do we have now, and what do we need to do? Cameron, I'll turn to you first.
Well, there are reporting requirements through the Higher Education Act, but it's capped at $250,000.
Yeah.
And there was also a federal piece of legislation called the Deterrent Act, but unfortunately it did not pass in Congress. It sought to lower that reporting threshold to $50,000. So there is some wiggle room there to lower the ceiling so there can be more transparency about these foreign gifts that are coming into our institutions of higher education. But there's also the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 that expressly prohibits university researchers from participating with malign foreign recruitment or malign foreign talent like recruitment programs. But that only invokes China, North Korea, Russia, Iran are entities in those countries.
Why is Qatar not on there when that they are noted as being the main artery of Hamas funding? Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure we hit that.
I mean,
Qatar is found to be the main artery for Hamas.
Yes.
Great.
And it's interesting, though, because they are they a friend? Are they a foe? Clearly, we have more than enough documentation that they are working with our adversaries. And so we do not know. I think the Trump administration has done an awesome job so far with this. However, Qatar tries to be a friend. Their geographic location makes it really tough to play friends to everyone. So sure. I think that there's a lot of gray area there, and we want to bring to light the case that this money is.
There's not a gray area when you're funding the murder.
Yeah.
We all saw what happened on October 7th.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know where the gray area would be.
Yeah.
You either support Western values or you don't.
I agree. I totally agree. And I think it's also important to note, too, with the current federal law, Section 117 of the Higher Education Act, if that threshold is at $250,000, foreign adversaries, they can give under the $250,000 to not trigger that reporting requirement. Right. And that is a lot of money. Exactly. And so universities, they already keep track of all this information, so it would not put an undue burden on the registrar's office. They already keep track of all of this. And so we would love to see there
but
being
they can't accept money from organizations or countries that fund organizations that are designated terrorists or are considered as hostile nations. Which right?
Yeah, so that begs the question like you're bringing up here, where does Qatar land on that? Are they friend or foe? Mm-hmm. And like Kate explained, they exist in this gray area because there are many economic factors and there are relationships within Qatar with many in the United States. So it puts us in a difficult position to try and figure out where do we land on Qatar in this instance.
Yeah, I think that's great. I want to point this out as we are going to be expanding here at the foundation our focus on what I would say is the Big Ed cartel, which is the entities, the far leftist secular Marxists, those over there like the American Federation for Teachers that recently partnered with the Council of American Islamic Relations, CAIR, which is a foreign terrorist organization. They recently partnered to come and do protests. They were trying to bust people in. They were holding calls to come and stop the new social studies TEKS, which was a huge win for Texas and America because it's the first time that any state in the union will have a chronological based social studies curriculum, which give context, which gives ideals. And of course, if you have context and ideals and you understand the development of Western civilization, but also what has occurred in the past and the context of it, you will understand why those that seek to spread Islamist political ideology are murderous dictators that have no place in American society.
Right.
And then you combine that with the entities that they work with and partner with under this red-green alliance that you talked about. Is there are people that are willing to make those relationships, whether it's because they are uninformed or whether it's because they see financial benefit. And that is really what we're going to be unraveling here. But I think it's important to note that lobbyists, many of them taxpayer-funded lobbyists, but lobbyists, including here in Texas, I looked it up on Transparency USA. Of course, it's not right now this year, but back in 2015, I think was the right year, the Qatari embassy had hired a lobbyist here in Texas. They're also on the federal lobbyist list. This has been going on, as y'all talked about, for well over a decade. This soft power play, this influence on our education system and our kids and the next generation, but also on our political leaders. Because that can feel like a lot of pressure when you're saying, oh, Texas, the leader of oil and gas in America, well, look what we do and look what we can fund. And we have a partnership with whoever it is, massive oil and gas company. And I do think that it's important to note that the way that lobbyists, taxpayer-funded lobbyists, influence and affect what's going on to allow these nefarious entities to wiggle their way in is really, really important for Texans to understand.
I totally agree. And also I want to go back to your question that you had asked earlier about what else can Texas do.
Yes.
Senator Ted Cruz, he has a wonderful policy proposal. It's a three-pronged approach in order to shed light on what's going on in the K through 12 space. And one of the first prong to this, I guess, is if a lesson, a book, or a program was paid for with money from another country, parents should know about it.
Yep.
We need our parents to know what is going on and where this money is coming from.
Meaning we need to be able to look through it to see what is this content in the Arabic programs.
Exactly.
Yep, 100%.
The second part to this is if a school makes a deal or a financial agreement with a foreign organization or a foreign government, parents should also be told about this. There's no secret foreign partnerships. We need more transparency.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then lastly, parents should also know if people working at their child's school are being paid for by another country. Parents should also know this. It's all about transparency. And so we would love to see that at the K through 12 level, and we applaud what Senator Ted Cruz is doing with that.
Absolutely. Yes. Good job, Senator Cruz. And so where does that stand now?
That has been introduced. It is not law
Okay.
now, but we would love to see that take place in Texas as well.
So we can essentially take that proposal and implement that here in Texas.
Texify it.
Yes. So I want to, before we wrap up on this, you all have both done some excellent research that we are going to be sending out. We're having an event coming up in a couple weeks with lots of legislative leaders. We will make sure and send this to Senator Cruz so that he has it for his push in at the federal level, and may just be taking those ideas from him and trying to push them at the state level. Cameron, just give a quick summation of the research that you found and what we need to do moving forward.
Well, as we've laid out through this entire podcast, this goes back decades, all the way back to the 90s, and it's been continuing to happen where Qatar is setting up these foundations, these nonprofits. It's the Qatari Foundation, it's the Qatari Foundation International. Even after disaster relief, the Qatar Harvey Foundation providing funds to schools as well. And so, as we've laid out, Qatar connected with terrorist organizations, funneling the money to these education foundations that are then funneling down to Texas schools. And so, if Qatar wants to influence the education system here in Texas, they're already doing it through these funds, through these foundations, through these grants, and it's in our ISDs, it's in our institutions of higher education. Luckily, a lot of that has been exposed through reporting that we've covered, but still, like Kate mentioned, there are loopholes in the reporting requirements, lowering the threshold for how much money needs to be reported. We need more transparency through our ISDs in regards to what is actually being taught in the curriculum that is being provided by these foundations. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, thank you. Kate, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, you've been helping to look at all of this. What is the greatest danger, and why must Texans pay attention to this growing threat to our great state?
The greatest danger, I would say, is it's a threat to our American values and what makes America separate from any other nation on earth. And so I think it's important and crucial that we teach our kids how important and how great our country is. And if we don't know where our curriculum is coming from, and if our curriculum says otherwise, it's really important to get some eyes on that and pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for the work that you're doing. I know that we've just released an article here that we'll make sure and send out to all of our viewers and post it so that they can see your latest research. I know we're going to continue to be digging into this and make sure that we're shining a light on that Red-Green Alliance and the infiltration of our public K through 12 and our university systems. Thank you both for your willingness to take on this vital issue that really does it does affect the entire republic. And as goes Texas, so will goes the country. So thank you guys for being there on the front lines and fighting back against the Islamists that seek to overthrow our government and change our way of life. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.